In this video today, we're going to discuss search engine optimization, which is absolutely one of the core principles that you should be working on towards having a good digital marketing strategy. So let's start by discussing what SEO is and why actually it matters. SEO is essentially trying to improve your website so that you can get as high of a ranking as possible within search engine results. Right? So let's talk for a minute why we're interested in talking about search engines. As it probably will not surprise you, about 2/3 of all interactions in the internet starts with a search engine and somebody typing in, or maybe nowadays using voice to ask Siri for a particular question or type in a query. Right? So you go to Google and you type in hotel in Richmond, Virginia, right? Maybe because you're going to go there on vacation or you have a conference, whatever the reason is, right? Roughly 70% of all interactions online start like that, right? And here is the surprising and devastating or crushing fact, is that if you are not in the top 10 results, your chances of being chosen as a destination website, right, are roughly 10% or less. Of course, this depends by the query, etc., etc., right? Even further, if you're not in the top 20 results, your chances on average are about 1% or less that your website will ever be clicked on or selected, at least with this particular query or search. So this means that if we are not ranking high in the search results, we're giving up a really large volume of traffic. People are not going to be going to my website, even though maybe they are interested in the kind of products that we are offering. And because they are not coming to my website, it's a lot harder for me to conduct any other marketing activity in this digital environment. By the way, I'm assuming that you guys can see this in the diagram, right? But let me just mention how you would read this. This is the number of times that the result within a Google query is actually clicked on, right? And as you can see here is the ranking within the query, right? So you type in the query, in my case, hotels in Richmond, Virginia, right? And the first link is selected roughly 90 million times within this particular query. By the way, this is not the data for the query that I'm mentioning, but this is an average across multiple queries. Okay. So you can see here, most of the searches are just the first one. And as you can see here, your probability of being chosen dramatically drops. The top 3 are the bulk, as you can see, right? About 70% of all clicks, right? And the top 10 are over 90%. And it decreases so quickly that once that you hit 20, you cannot even see the histogram, right? So what this tells you is that it is absolutely imperative for you to do well in the digital space to optimize or to maximize the chances that you will be high up in the ranking for especially your target segment or target customers. We'll talk more about this in a few slides. So now that we understand what search engine optimization is, and now that we at least hopefully see the reason why it's so important, and let me tell you that in general, there are 2 different ways of going about this. One is called white hat SEO, and this is what most well-meant managers, I think, will like to do. Right? This is essentially when you do search engine optimization and you're trying to improve your website's rankings by essentially leveraging your understanding of the algorithms used by the search engines. And when I'm talking about search engines, I'm really talking about Google, because Google has over 80% of all searches right now, right? So I'm really talking about Google, but the rest of the search engines work similarly, right? And basically, based on that, try to make sure that your website is appealing both to the search engine, let's say, and to your potential or actual customers. Okay? What you're trying to do is you're trying to create a website that actually people want to go to, as opposed to being tricked into getting to because they use some clever understanding of the algorithm. And the search engines having their best interest to make sure that the websites that they show up at the top are indeed the best websites for your query, right? So what you're trying to do is you are trying to help with that. Okay. The alternative to this, known as black hat SEO, is to basically try to come up with tricks that break the algorithm's fit between the query and what the customer is looking for, or the user in general, right? They're trying to find some sort of exploitable loop that is going to enable them, people engage in this kind of activities, it's going to enable them to show up high up in the rankings, even though their website has content that is really not relevant to the query or the search. Okay, and to do this, you're going to use multiple techniques, most of which I don't want to discuss because they are, for the most part, bad practices, and it will get you. You will get incur penalties from search engines, and your website basically will be deranked or delisted. But maybe in the short term, you may be able to get some traffic. But you're going to engage in things like keyword stuffing, right? What is that? Well, that's essentially when you find keywords that are particularly useful or interesting. And because of that, instead of creating content that is useful for somebody that will be typing those keywords, you just stuff those keywords in the website in different places, maybe in the headlines, maybe in the metadata, maybe within the body of the website. And you're trying to trick the algorithm basically into assuming that your website is actually relevant. And what will happen, and Google will be able to verify this easily, is that most customers will bounce off your website, right? You'll have a high bounce rate, which means that people will end up clicking on the link because your result will show up at the top. But when you go to the website, the customer or the user will realize that the content is not relevant to them, and they will bounce. They will just go somewhere else. Okay, this is not a good practice, and it's not in line with the rest of the material that I'm going to be discussing. Although in the short term, it could be something that will get you some traffic. Now, what kind of activities are we going to engage in when we're doing SEO? Well, for us to understand what kind of things will be improvements into our website, maybe it will be useful for us to get a little handle on how search engines actually work. Right? So let me briefly, big picture, discuss how search engines work. What search engines do essentially is they index material. Right? So they send these little bots called spider crawlers. Right? And what they do is they basically go through all the websites in the internet, maybe a small portion at a time. And what they do is they basically read through the HTML code associated with all the websites, right? And they will crawl from website to website, assuming that there are links associated with them. And what they're doing essentially is they are replicating or creating a copy of all the websites available in the World Wide Web, right? So they are creating their own version of the World Wide Web that they can just use to create some sort of algorithm that is going to tell them how good of a fit a particular page is given a query. What is a query anyway? A query is basically a set of words, usually words, although it could have numbers too, of course, that it's used to suggest what kind of information are you looking for as a user. Right? So when you type in restaurant in Chicago, Illinois, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find a place where you can go and eat, right? In a particular, in this case, geographic location, right? Those 4 words are the query, right? And what the search engine is trying to do is trying to map those queries to the index that the search engine has created of the whole World Wide Web, right? And it so happens that pages that have a lot of those words, right, and on top of having those words that are popular, right, so a lot of people go there, and obviously Google has information about who's going where, because given that I mentioned, Google on average has over 50,000 queries per second, right, and they can see where you're clicking, right, so they know what's popular, right? They also know what's relevant. The way Google assesses relevance, other than the keywords, like I've already mentioned, is whether you bounce off or not, right? How much engagement time do you spend after you have landed on the page, right? If something is relevant to your query, there's a good chance that you're going to spend a good amount of time on that page, right? Or not only time, but it also could be that you might click in multiple sub pages within the home screen that you have arrived to, or landing page, whatever it is. Right? Also, they will look at trust, right? There are some companies in the marketplace that basically provide trust certificates based on things like the kind of encryption algorithms that you're using if you're holding customer information, etc., etc. In particular, all search engines have complex algorithms that enable them to basically find relevant information. Famously, Google used to use an algorithm called PageRank. They have modified and changed it over the years, but it's an algorithm that at some point became actually publicly available. So if you're interested in learning about how search engines work, I strongly suggest you type in PageRank and see what comes out of Google. Maybe you can find out some of the technical details. Google doesn't use that algorithm anymore, but what they use, the basic principles, are very similar. Okay. Now, what SEO is trying to do, like I've already mentioned, is trying to land you as high within the ranking of the results of the search engine page, right? Okay. Now, to do this, you're going to have to do essentially 2 very broad set of changes or improvements to your website. One, it's going to be called on-page optimization. This is essentially to do with what the website is, right? So that's going to mean, for example, using specific language to create the page. Let me give you an example. Most websites are created using HTML code. But some portions, particularly dynamic portions like graphics or some video, could be written in other code, for example, Flash. And HTML code is a lot easier to access for search engines. Those little crawlers that I was mentioning are going to be able to go through HTML a lot faster and easier than Flash. So in a situation like that, a search engine will be more likely to recommend a website that is written in HTML code than a website that has Flash, everything else being the same, right? What else? The content, obviously, in that page is going to be very important. We're going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail, but you're going to want to have content that is relevant to the query that the user has actually created, right? And the structure of the page also matters. If it's easy to navigate within the website and find what the customer wants, that's going to be something that the search engine is going to actually positively weigh in your favor. So if your website is easier to navigate, it loads faster, it's something that it's going to give you more ranking within the search. So those are all positives. By the way, a lot of this content obviously is quite technical, and some of those more technical aspects we're not going to discuss in detail in class. But if you're interested, you can access them in the book, and you can do further reading, obviously. Okay. Secondly, it's not only what you do in your page that it's going to matter, because a lot of the algorithms heavily weight how other websites think that your page is. What do I mean by that? Well, if your content is very relevant, what's going to happen is other websites are going to link your page when it comes down to some of the content that they are displaying in their own page, right? So there are these outside links that go to your site, and the number and the quality of these links are going to determine to a large degree what the search engine is going to think about your page. So it's not only build a great page, but it's also build connections with other websites that is going to basically favor you in the long term, right? So you might actually have to do other things other than improve your website for you to have high rankings within the search engine result pages. Okay. Now, how do you actually do it? I'm kind of giving you the basic idea of the two things that you need to do. Like I've mentioned, it's going to be mostly technical, and some of these aspects are covered in the book that we're using in chapter 6 and 7, which we are not going to cover in this class, but obviously you're welcome to work on your own if you're interested in some of the technical aspects and you want to learn about the nitty-gritty. But if you want to think about it from a strategic perspective, what you're going to have to do first is make sure that your website is basically search engine friendly, right? How do you achieve this? I've already mentioned the source code that you actually use to create the website matters, right? The structure of the website matters, right? How much content there is versus how many graphics matters, because that's going to influence, for example, the speed at which the website loads. Something that maybe in developed countries is less valued because we have broadband connections, and because of that we can access content reasonably quickly. But if you go, for example, to other countries around the world where maybe broadband connections not mainstream, then the speed at which the page loads is actually going to matter, right? Then the second aspect that we're going to have to seriously think about, other than how well structured the information is how do we build the content? And to build the content, a good strategy is to start with keywords, right? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to back engineer our website. Instead of trying to come up with what we think will be a good website, what we're going to do is we're going to think about what will our customers do if they're trying to find us? What kind of query will they type in? And based on that, we're going to come up with a list of keywords, right? These are going to be the words that our potential customers or actual customers are most likely to actually use when they're trying to find companies like ours or companies that sell similar products and services, right? And then based on those keywords, we're going to build the content around it. Right? That is the smart way to do it. Instead of coming up with the content first and then try to stuff the keywords. That doesn't work very well. Okay, and it will not pay off in the long term. And then after we do this, what we're going to try to do is improve the amount of links that are pointing in our direction. This might mean, for example, that we might want to have websites that relate to other content that might be site related to what we're doing, and we might point those websites to the to the original website that we're trying to create, right? So the more of a presence that you have online and the more links that we can create towards our main page, the more likely our page is going to show up at the top of the results. Okay. Now, finally, for this part of the presentation, although we will continue later, out of those 4 points that I made in the last slide. The one we're going to spend most of the time in class is going to be discussing this idea of keywords, because I will say if I have to pick one aspect of website design, it's about the content. If your content is not good, your customers are not going to be interested in going to your website, but after they land there, engaging with your website and therefore with your company, right? So content is king, and for you to build good themes of content, you need to start with good keywords that you can build the content around, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to basically try to understand how keywords work. Now, let me mention a couple of things regarding keywords. Number one, it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what your customers or potential customers will think. So try to put yourselves into the shoes of your customers. Assume that you know nothing about your industry and your brand. And now try to get yourself into that situation, and what will you type in when you go to Google or any other search engine of your choice, right? That's how you start thinking about keywords. If you're an expert, if you know your brand, if you know what your motto and your logo are, and you are not a good prospect to generate those keyword lists, because you're an expert, right? And assume that you're not. That's the first part. The second part, there are multiple factors that you should consider when you're searching for keywords. The first one is how likely is a page to show up if somebody uses that keyword. So if you use generic keywords like the word hotel or restaurant or car, right, the number of searches that you're going to run to is probably in the billions. It is not a very useful word, right? And the main reason why it's not very useful is because there are many different reasons why you might type in the word car. Maybe you're looking for a new car. Maybe you're looking for an old car. Maybe you're trying to rent a car, right? All those three very different scenarios will use the word car anyway, right? So search volume, which is the number of times a word actually shows up, it's a good indicator of how popular search queries are, but having a really large search volume is not 100% an indication that you're in the right track. Okay, you should look at it, but it's not the only game in town. Okay. Number two, competition. Okay, your competitors are gonna build their websites based on keywords as well, right? So you should actually look at what your competitors are up to. And we're gonna use some tools that are gonna enable us to at least have a guess as to how many other companies are using similar keywords. And based on that, you might choose to not use keywords that are highly competitive, because you might not have the resources to compete head-on with large corporations. Finally, you want to look at how those keywords are going to convert into click-throughs. What does that mean? How likely are you to be selected if you're using that keyword, right? The likelihood to convert, the likelihood to have a certain action. It doesn't have to be purchase, it could be just clicking on your link so they can go to your website, right? And that's going to be an important metric. And that's going to be a function, among other things, of not only your search volume, but most importantly, the quality of the customers or potential customers that you're going to attract, right? If it's a vague word like cars, it's a lot less likely that people are going to click on your page, because there are many different scenarios under which they will type in that word, and because of that, the quality of the leads that you're getting is relatively low. Finally, and related to the same point, there is the value per lead, right? Not every customer is created equal, and the kind of leads that you're going to get and how much, for example, are they willing to spend in a particular product category are going to be a function, among other things, of the queries that have used. If somebody used the word cheap hotel, they are probably a lot less likely to spend a lot of money in a hotel room versus somebody who typed in luxury hotel. And this is something that you should be very clear and upfront, so that you can actually make better decisions about your keyword and the potential associated.